Welcome everyone to today's webinar. I am Emma Goodman with Becker's Healthcare. We will begin today's webinar with a presentation and we'll have time at the end of the hour for a question and answer session led by Becker's Healthcare publisher, Scott Becker. You can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar by typing them into your control panel in the space labeled Enter a Question for Staff and clicking Send. We are looking forward to hearing your questions. Additionally, in about a week following the webinar, we will be sending you a copy of the presentation to the email you used to register. At this time, it's now my pleasure to start today's webinar by introducing our webinar sponsor. Ambulatory Surgical Centers of America, known as ASCOA, was founded in 1997 by three surgeons, Dr. Brent Lambert, Dr. Tom Bombardier, and Dr. George Violin. Since that time, ASCOA has developed an industry-wide reputation for clinical quality, development, expertise, and outstanding financial performance. They have developed over 75 centers nationwide. After initially doing only de novo ASC development and having great financial success, ASCOA began to receive many requests from struggling surgery centers to help them become more successful. They were able to apply their proven development and operational models to those struggling centers and were able to rescue many failing centers and turn them into profitable and efficient ASCs. They became known as the turnaround experts. Today, we have several key members from the ASCOA team that are prepared to share with you some tips and tricks for helping to make sure your ASC is as efficient and profitable as possible. Jeff Peo is the Chief Development Officer for ASCOA. He has been with ASCOA for 13 years, starting with the company as a financial analyst and then as a Senior Vice President of Business Development and Acquisitions. He's a regular presenter at the Becker's ASC meetings and a contributor to our online and print materials. I will now turn the floor over to Jeff to start the presentation and introduce the rest of the ASCOA team.
Thank you, Emma, and thanks to everybody for joining us today. We're grateful for the opportunity we have to spend a few minutes with you today and talking about your ambulatory surgical center and as Emma said, give you some tips and some tricks to help your efficiency and your profitability in your surgery center. Today with me, I have two of our Senior Vice Presidents of Operations, Margaret Chappell. Margaret has over 25 years experience in all aspects of surgery center administration and is a valuable and fantastic resource for us with all of our surgery centers that we have across the country. So we'll be hearing from her in a minute. We also have with us Jason Beam, who is another of our Senior Vice Presidents of Operation with over 16 years experience in the surgery center industry. We're grateful to have him as well. Both Margaret and Jason have their CASC certification as well, and just a wealth of experience. So I look forward to turning some time over to them here shortly. What I thought we would do, go through the agenda here really quickly. The idea for us today is to spend a few minutes going through and I pulled up here for us now our contact information. Jeff, Margaret, and Jason. You can see our email addresses there. Please feel free to write these down and to send any information or any questions to us after this webinar. We'd be happy to respond to you. And I'll put this back up here at the end of the presentation as well. What I thought is we'd go over the format for this webinar. As you all registered for this webinar, there were a number, or one of the questions that was asked to you is what area you thought would, for improvement, you'd like to see addressed for your surgery center. We got a number of responses. We had over 400 people that submitted questions for us, and so we kind of collated those numbers and came up with 6 of the top areas that people requested to hear more information about. And those are the things that we're going to address here for the next half hour or so. If these questions that you had, or if you had a specific question that we aren't going to cover right here, we encourage you to submit those questions, as Emma talked about, in the dialog box there off to the side. and we'll have some time at the end where Scott will be able to ask us additional questions, and that you can kind of pick the brains of Margaret, Jason, if some of those things are important to you that we're not able to cover. If we're still not able to cover it, some specific questions you have, then please feel free to email us, and we'll be happy to respond. One of the things that I've really liked about being involved in the surgery center space for the last 13 years is that this is a close-knit family, really, of professionals, and we are very happy to share with everyone who will listen our philosophy and our thoughts on how surgery centers can be improved, and how you can improve efficiency, and how you can improve their profitability. So for us, we're thrilled to be able to share those things with you, and are open to any kind of conversation that you'd like to have around that space. So please feel free to take advantage of that and reach out to us if you'd like to. Here are the topics that we'd like to cover today. As we mentioned, the topic of the webinar is how to improve our efficiency and our profitability of your surgery centers. Two of the areas under really what I'd call the efficiency area are questions around what are key areas that you can gain efficiency in your surgery center. And another question is, what metrics should we track, and how do we utilize those metrics once we track them? From a profitability standpoint, we will talk about case costing, the importance of case costing and why we case cost, and then also how we recruit, how we bring new cases into the center to help that center grow. The third thing under profitability we'll talk about is how we improve our reimbursements for the surgery center. And lastly, we'll talk about how we can improve the collections and actually get the money that we deserve at our surgery centers. So those are the 6 topics and the areas that, based on your feedback to us, you'd like to get more information on, and that's what we're going to address today. So what we'll start with, I'll turn the time over to Jason, and he's going to take you through some of the key areas on improving the efficiency in your surgery center. Jason?
Thanks, Jeff. So we just pinpointed on a few things that we critically look at when we're in our surgery centers. And the number one thing for us is when you're looking at our scheduling. As you're well aware, your OR time is your number one asset that you have to offer to your physicians. One key thing that we really focus in on for our scheduling is the compression of the OR schedule, or sometimes called vertical scheduling. What I mean by that is, when you look at your daily schedule, are you spread across multiple ORs with only a few cases at each, where we really focus on putting as many cases as we can into one OR and vertically stacking those cases. This requires a lot of support from the physicians using your facility, but many times we see that many ORs are not utilized appropriately, and too much open time and open space is in there, which is very costly to the center. Does your center have a policy for how many cases is required to be in a room for that room to be open? That would vary, obviously, across specialties and what types of cases are being performed. But for each one of our facilities, we all have a policy in place that, if you only have a couple of cases in that room, does that justify to staff that room for that day and bring people in and perform those cases? Also under scheduling, I have staffing and supplies. These are the 2 areas of expense that you have the most control over as an administrator or director running the center. So, you want to make sure that you're staffed appropriately, staffed to the schedule that's being performed for that day. You got to have lots of flexibility in your staffing. And when it comes to supplies, for efficiency, you want to, we really, our centers really focus on having very accurate preference cards, knowing what your doctors are going to use, what you need to have in the room on hold, so that your staff's not, running in and out of the OR trying to track down supplies while you're spending time in the OR. Next thing on there is inventory. Inventory for us, from an efficiency standpoint, you want to make sure that your materials manager are really viewing that schedule, 1 or 2 weeks in advance. They're ordering supplies based on cases that are going to be coming into the center that are going to be performed. You don't want them using, templated orders and they're just ordering the same stuff every time, not based on the cases that are actually going to be being done. Are your stock levels appropriate? How much stock do you have on the shelf? Do you have par levels in place? Do those par levels how often are they looked at, evaluated, determined if you need to increase or decrease the par levels? Because as you know, inventory can be a huge costly factor sitting on the shelf and product not being moved or being used anymore. Depletions, are you depleting? How accurately is the staff depleting the inventory? Are they tracking every supply that gets used on that case? Is it being tracked to the case being performed in the system that you have? And is it being done correctly? And then probably one of the most overlooked areas is contract compliance. You want to get the absolute best cost for the supply item as possible. And even though you're ordering a supply through either the GPO that you use or through your distributor, and that first you want to make sure that that supply item is on contract, but then take it one step further. Does that item have a LOC that could be signed and you could get better pricing? And are you acquiring the best tier level for that supply item? And then thirdly, we put on there is the business office. Most importantly, your AR protocol. One, do you have an AR policy in place? Do you have a checklist and a system in place where they're following up appropriately on how to collect? The timing of the accounts being touched and how often are they being touched, and the follow-up. Follow-up is very key with the payers, and Margaret's going to touch a little bit more on AR, so more to come on that.
Jason, maybe you could give a couple of tips on how vertical compression, vertical scheduling is not an easy thing to get your doctor group to accept. Can you give some tips on how or some ways that you can help ease that transition?
Yeah, you're right. It is very tricky, and it does require great communication among the physicians. The best thing you can do is educate the physician on the cost of the facility and what it costs to open up an OR and run it for the day. I'll get a little more into fixed costs here in a minute on case costing. But, things that you can look at or tricks you can see, you have a doctor that usually always typically books a 7:30, 8 o'clock start time, always running late, shows up late. Take that opportunity. If you got another doc that's got 2 cases in another room, offer them a 7 a.m. cut time and, work with the physicians in the offices. But it's ideal to get as much cases into one OR as possible.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate that very much. Okay. Margaret, let's turn the time over to Margaret, and she can talk more about, excuse me, let's skip a slide there. Yes, I did. Efficiency in the ASC, talking about different metrics that we track, why those metrics are important, and how we utilize those metrics once we track them. Margaret.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, everyone. One of the things that I feel is the most important, and I know ASCOA does also, are your accounts receivable days. How long does it take you to actually get your bill out and collect the money? Obviously, you can't do anything without the money coming in the door. So one of the most important things to actually look at, your turnover time. What, from the time that your physician goes in the room with a patient until he goes out of the room, what is that time? Are you wasting time? Do you have enough staff to turn the room over quickly? Is your physician sitting around waiting? Is your staff sitting around waiting? As Jason mentioned earlier, the two things that you can control in a surgery center are your supplies and your salary. You want to utilize your staff, make sure they are efficient, and make sure that turnover time is excellent. One of the things that we pride ourselves on is a very fast turnover time, because the physician wants to be in your surgery center when they can work efficiently and get out and see patients in the office or spend time with their families. Late start, as Jason mentioned this earlier also, if you have a physician that's chronically late, if you can analyze why he or she is chronically late. Are they late because they always drive carpool on Thursday mornings and they have a 7 o'clock start time and just don't want to tell you, and you can get someone else in there to do those cases, do 2 other cases before they start and run their carpool? What can you do to correct a late start? Is it anesthesia is not there? Is it staffing? What is your policy? Drill down into why you're starting a case late. Cancellations, regardless of whether they're the day of surgery or 2 days before surgery. Your staff has actually put in the effort to schedule the case, probably do a pre-op assessment, probably spent some time on insurance verification. Why is the case being canceled? Is it because your communication with the physician office is not adequate? Is it because your pre-op assessment isn't adequate? The patient didn't prep properly for surgery, or you didn't get the information that you needed prior to the day of surgery. Profitability. Obviously, you have to measure your profitability. How much money is in the bank and how much money is it costing you to run the center? Those are the things that you need to look at every day. Jeff?
Margaret, can you speak a little bit to what you do with this data? How do you get your doctors invested into seeing that this data is important and actually wanting that collected and tracked? I mean, it's not easy all the time to collect this data. How can you, get them involved with the process, and how do you keep them updated with this information?
We try to put this information in front of each physician at least once a month. If we're noticing a trend in late starts, for instance, I think that's something that has to be addressed on a weekly basis. At times you have to make rules in your center. If you're late 3 times for a 7 o'clock start, you lose that preferred OR time. We try to steer away from block time and use a preferred operating room time. But that comes with the efficiency that the physician actually brings to the center. If you abuse the privilege of a 7 a.m. start, which is coveted by almost everyone, then you shouldn't be allowed to keep that start. So those are the sort of things that we actually have to bring to the attention of each physician if they abuse the privilege. Just like cancellations, if they're not screening their patients properly, it leads to inefficiency in the surgery center.
And what's the good target for the AR days metric?
We would like to see the AR days between 30 and 33. I think the industry average right now is around 40. It's one of the most important things you can do to keep money coming in the door is look at those AR days and determine what is making them high, if they are in fact high.
Or artificially low? I mean, can the AR days be artificially low?
I must say that generally when you see very low AR days, it's because you're doing a huge amount of Medicare cases, which, you know, we can say what we want to, but Medicare usually pays in 14 to 21 days, so that does drive the AR days down.
And is there a procedure or a process that you go through to make sure that these things are, you know, when you make changes, when you identify changes that need to be made in the metrics perspective, is there a process you use to uniformly help to correct these things, a quality type assurance type of process, or how do you go about, you know, affecting change when you identify something that needs to be changed?
Absolutely. We benchmark all of our centers, and in the case of some attendees on this call, I know that you may not have the opportunity to benchmark against a sister center. However, there are, I know that Scott actually produces some benchmarks that we can all take advantage of. Drill down into everything that's going on in your center and make notes. I believe that unless you document what's going on, and this could be the nurse and me and in Jason, you can't truly understand what's going on in your center. But the key is to benchmark. You can look at your results week after week on late starts, turnover time, your days in AR, what your cancellations are, and what your profitability is. If you can trend it and track it, then you can make changes.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Margaret. Emma, there's a note on here that says that the sound quality is having problems. I don't know if you've seen that or if there's something we can do to clean that up. Just noticed that on the
Jeff, you are.
Questions there.
We are all set. You guys are good to continue.
Okay, thank you. All right, next topic for us. We're done with the efficiency, and now I think what we'll do is turn the time over to Jason to talk a little bit more about case costing and the importance of case costing in profitability to try and help us make these centers more profitable.
Thanks, Jeff. So case costing is one of our key tools that we use in our surgery centers in evaluating profitability for our physicians at that center. Case costing is done on a monthly basis. We do this every month. We look at a trailing 3 months. So for September, we'll be looking at May or June's data on cases that were performed at the center. This 3-month lag gives you ample enough time to allow you to collect your money so that you have some data to look at. And if you haven't collected it in that 90-day term, that obviously spikes other questions to ask as to why. We look at case costing. We look at case by case. We look at every single case performed in that month of data service. We group the physicians by specialty. We look at, in particular, we want to see the supply expense for that case. We want to look at the time spent in the OR on that case. We want to look at all the implant and supply usages for that case. And we want to factor in our fixed cost, our overhead cost associated with every case at the center. A simple formula to calculate what your overhead cost is per minute for your center is simply just running a P&L for that month. So if we're looking at May's data, we'll run a P&L for the month of May in accrual basis, not cash, depending on how you run your financials in your center. So you want to run this P&L on an accrual basis. And then you want to look at your total operating expense for that month. And then we're going to subtract out the drugs, supplies, and implants used in that month, as well as any interest, depreciation, or amortization expense used in that month. That will give us our new operating expense for the month, and you want to divide that number by the total operative minutes in the month. So how many minutes were spent in the OR performing cases for that entire month. That'll now give you a new your overhead cost per minute. and you can use that to factor into your total cost for each case when looking at the cases. Now, how to use the data. This particular exercise will give glaring results in many facets inside the center. But for us, we use the data to simply see, is the case a good case to being performed at the center, and are we making money? First and foremost, we want to make sure that we're covering our supply costs for the case. Doctors across the board like to use lots of things and lots of gadgets and widgets, and they're very expensive. And so we use this data to compare, to let them see what it costs them to do their shoulder scopes or their knee scopes or their cataract surgery or what, and what it exactly costs to perform the case. You then add in the cost for how much time they spend in the OR. This is usually the shocking factor to most physicians of what it costs to run a facility. I can tell you, SCOA facilities on average run at about $18 a minute. We see the average. We have centers as high as $30 a minute, depending on the market and where you're at. But factoring in every minute counts in the OR can add up very quickly. But most importantly, we share the information with the physicians on a monthly basis. We let them look at their cases, what they perform, what we billed, how long they spent in the OR, what the cost was, and then what we collected. And anything you collected minus the total cost was your profit. Hopefully you don't have many brackets on your sheet, but as you well know, we do. For example, just last week I used case costing at a facility up in upper state New York, and when I was looking at the case costing, I particularly looked at a pain physician. Pain is usually a very good specialty for us in our surgery centers. We usually do very well. And when I look at this one particular pain physician, the profitability was in the brackets. It was negative. I dug in a little deeper and looked at the time spent in the OR. It wasn't great, but it wasn't bad. He was spending about 20 minutes per case, 21 minutes per case. And so then I moved on to the supply cost. And when I looked at supply cost, he looked high to me. So the first thing I did is I went to the materials manager and I looked to see was the facility staff depleting and tracking the supplies used for each case accurately. So we looked at the preference card, we went into their case history, and we looked at each case, and they were. But in this particular instance, there was a drug that this one physician was using. It was Isoview, which is, everybody knows, is very commonly used in pain cases. They were paying about $73 a vial for a 10 milliliter vial of Isoview. And when we went into the GPO to look at other options and to see if this drug was on contract, it was. They, showed right there, this drug's on contract, but it's saying $3. But what they had missed was there was an LOC to sign. Once we signed the LOC, the cost of the drug dropped down to just barely over $6. We went from a $73 vial drug to a $6 vial drug, and when you factor in the new cost of the drug, lo and behold, the pain physician was profitable on every case. So it's a very valuable tool to use. It educates our physicians on what things cost in the center. It allows them, within the specialty, they can, the best friend you got is peer pressure. You can use the peers within the facility to help one another on the things that they're using and why they're using so much, and drive down the cost.
I love that example that you just shared. I think that that's a powerful example of just why you need the case cost. So let me ask you a couple of questions real quick here, Jason. So how often do you recalculate the overhead cost per minute? Do you do that every month, or do you just kind of do it once and use it for a little bit of time? What's your how often do you do that?
Yeah, I recommend doing it every month. It's simple. So this month we're working on May. Next month we'll be doing June. We will run a new P&L for the month of June. and calculate our new overhead costs.
Okay, and so can you just one more time remind me to make sure I have it down? The equation for that is what? You take your revenue,
sure,
subtract out.
You run your P&L for the month, and at the you'll have all your total operating expenses for that month. And what you'll do is subtract out all your drugs and supplies, include your implants. Then you subtract out any interest payments that were made, interest that maybe you have on a loan or your capital, working capital, whatnot, and then any amortization or depreciation expense. That'll give you your new total operating expense, and you divide that number by your total operative minutes for the same month. And that'll give you
overhead cost per minute.
Per minute.
Yeah. Okay. So when you're calculating each doctor's individual, you take the revenue they got for the case, you subtract from that their expenses for that case, and you also subtract the number of minutes they spend in the OR multiplied by that OR cost per minute, the overhead cost per minute. And that gives you profitability or loss. Gotcha. Okay. Right. Perfect. This is a great tool. When we go to board meetings, and pass out the board packets where we do this every month for the doctors, this becomes the first thing that our doctors in all of our centers look at. They turn straight to their page where they are, and they look at how many, cases they had and how profitable they were. They can't wait to show their colleagues which cases they had that were super profitable, and they can't wait to grump at the person that has cases that look like they're losing money. So this really is a great tool, and it's one that doesn't, once you train your doctors on what to look for and what this data is, this becomes a very powerful tool for people spending less time in the ORs and being there on time and using less in supplies. It really is a very powerful tool to help you be profitable as a surgery center. Thanks, Jason. Anything more to cover on case costing? I know this is a quick overview of it.
Oh, no, I could spend hours on case costing it.
Okay, if you have more questions about case costing, please contact Jason. The next thing for us is my sole contribution to this whole discussion today is talking about recruiting in the surgery center. One of the best ways for us to add revenue to a center is to always be recruiting, and that's what the first bullet point there is ABR. We should always be recruiting. We should always be looking for opportunities to recruit and to bring new doctors or new cases into the center. That can be done in a couple of ways. One is that we take cases we take additional cases from our existing physicians and make sure that we're getting and capturing all of the cases that are eligible to bring to the center that you want to have at the center. It's very important that you capture as many of those cases as you can and help your physician partners to recognize the importance of bringing those cases to the center. That may mean you need, if you're not capturing those cases, you need to communicate with those doctors and find out why you're not capturing those cases. Maybe it's that you don't have appropriately trained staff, or maybe it's that you don't have the right supplies or the right equipment that you need. And at that point, that gives you the opportunity to look at and do an analysis to see if those are cases that you can bring in-house by adding those supplies or adding those pieces of equipment if it makes financial sense for you to do so. So you should always be looking at your existing surgeons, your existing partners in your project, in your surgery center, to make sure you're capturing all of those eligible cases. It's also helpful sometimes to, when you're looking at and doing your distributions, if those doctors understand that instead of doing half of their cases in the hospital and half of them in the surgery center, what your distributions might look like if they were to do all of their eligible cases in the surgery center. And we will sometimes run those types of reports or do that type of report for the doctors to look at and to show them the benefit and the value of bringing those cases into the surgery center. Also, the opportunity is there to add additional specialties or add additional doctors that may have different specialties. Again, that takes a lot of work up front for you to see, and you need to look very carefully at what that would add to your expenses by adding trained staff for that, or if it's something that your existing staff already has skill set in. if you need additional equipment, and how much that equipment is. And then you need to have these doctors come in, and you can usually borrow that equipment first to test these, to make sure that the doctors are comfortable with it and that your staff is comfortable with it. And then you can make sure that these are doctors that are a good fit before you bring them on as partners into the surgery center or have them doing cases there. So trying always to, borrow that equipment or get it as a loaner from the vendors before you go out and make a big purchase. At ASCOA, we are not big believers in if you build it, they will come. We're not fans of trying to say that if we buy a whole bunch of ortho equipment, we're going to attract the ortho doctors in the market. We see that in centers that fail, and that's as we go and try and turn these centers around. You find centers that have followed that philosophy and have fallen flat on their face. As also, in addition to recruiting additional specialties, also recruit doctors in your marketplace that are in the specialties that you already have at your surgery center. That's low-hanging fruit. That is the place to really start, because you don't have to add additional staff. You don't have to add additional equipment. These are people that are already doing the cases that your staff is very comfortable with, so always look there first. There are a couple of overlooked areas that, and it's getting tougher and tougher to find new doctors. But look at, if you're looking for doctors and you feel like you've picked over everybody or everybody's picked over, look at doctors that are coming off employment contracts with the hospital. Oftentimes those are doctors that are looking for a place, that are frustrated with what they've had with the hospital and are looking for a place to do their cases and are looking for opportunities to join surgery centers. So look for that. Be very aware of what's going on in your community and who's coming off of contract, and talk with your doctor partners. I've added this use your resources wisely. Really what that means is you have a room full of doctors that are your partners. Teach them the importance of recruiting. Ask them to help you recruit. Ask them to talk to their peers. Ask them to give you introductions. Ask them to be with you when you have those conversations or when you have people come and tour the facility. Talk to your staff. Who do they know that might be looking for a surgery center? Who do they know that might or isn't happy in the current place they're doing cases? Who are their neighbors? Are their neighbors doing surgery? Can they bring them? Can they invite them to come tour the center? Have them be at the center with you when you tour. Margaret actually just recruited a couple people to one of our surgery centers because they're neighbors a couple doors down, and it opened up a huge opportunity for us in that marketplace to bring in some significant volume of cases just because she happened to know them and opened her mouth and thought to talk to them about recruiting. So it's a lot of opportunity for us out there in recruiting-wise. It really is not there's no magic wand to it. There's no magic thing that you can just wave, no magic wand you can wave and have the recruits pile in. It is roll up your sleeves, hard work type of effort that's involved there. And as Jason said with case costing, this is a topic that we could spend an hour on or more, and usually I do at every Becker's meeting, and will be again at the one coming up here in October. So if you want to talk further about recruiting or challenges you're having there or want some additional ideas, please don't hesitate to message me after this call. But certainly one of the best ways for you to improve the profitability of your surgery center is to add additional cases. Let's talk now about improving the profitability by improving your reimbursements. Margaret, is that you that's doing that one?
No,
Jason.
it's Jason.
Oh, it's Jason. Sorry. Okay, Jason, back to you.
All right. Thanks, Jeff. For reimbursement, so contracts and payers, this is a tough one as well. Obviously, it's getting more and more difficult in today's time negotiating really good payer contracts. For us, we typically move from an all out-of-network type scenario into completely in-network for our facilities. And one thing that ASCOA does and does very well is we provide a third party who negotiates our contracts, and they have very great expertise. they're able to use the market, compare the data anywhere in the country, and I think that really benefits our facilities and getting the best possible rates with these payers. From inside the facility, from a reimbursement perspective, one of the biggest areas that I see in facilities we go into is that are they being paid correctly? Is their contracts loaded completely in their system? Do they know what they should be paid? And then when they're not paid correctly, what's the steps taken in place to appeal, and how long does it take to get that fixed? When negotiating with the payers, we really try to look at what our top procedures being performed by specialty are, and really focus in on those procedures. We strive for carve-outs for those particular procedures to incorporate all of our costs. A lot of our facilities are heavy ortho and spine, and so a big focus for us is implant reimbursement. As everyone out there knows, implants have gotten extremely costly in the past few years, and many payers are not so willing to give you carve-outs or give you separate implant reimbursement. And so I really recommend tracking everything that you use as far as implants. The best tool that you can have if you're negotiating the contract yourself, or your managed care people contracting for you, or using a third party, is you got to have really good data. You got to be able to demonstrate how much you use in implants, how much the costs are, and how much you're eating on each case on an annual basis, because you're not getting reimbursed for that. In implant reimbursement, it's also very key to make sure your staff's all on the same page. Most of our billers are not clinical, so how well are they being given the information from your clinical staff that the implants were used on this particular case, and they need to be billed out to the payer? If you don't have a system in place that you can track and follow each case and track that you're capturing all of that expense and able to bill it and collect on it, you're missing a huge opportunity, because I promise you your biller's not getting all the data billed out to the payer. Negotiations with the vendors. Implants, obviously the best thing you can do is get your physicians using, I'd like to call it one source. I know how difficult that is, getting our docs to all use the same ones, but obviously the best chance you have is getting to focus in on one orthopedic vendor, or one IOL vendor, or what you have, and that'll give you much better bargaining power with your vendor in negotiations. But also, if you're fortunate enough to have contracts that carve out the implants and give you separate reimbursement, typically it's usually just cost. But don't spend so much time then focused on the implant cost as much as you do the supply costs, or what I call accessories to those implants, because those could be as much as 30 to 35% of total cost of that case. And the vendors have been beat up so long on implants, and know that our focus has been so hard on implants, that we tend to lose focus on the supplies. And what I mean is it's the drill bits and the cannulas and the special suture passers and all this disposable stuff that they're required for us to use for their implant is very expensive, and comes straight out of your bottom line, comes straight out of your profit, because that's not billable to the payer as an implant. So that's a strategy that you might try. Be willing to pay maybe a little bit more for the anchor itself, and get better cost on the supply item used to put it in.
Thanks, Jason. Appreciate it. We'll turn the time over to Margaret now to talk a little bit about profitability with using improved collections. Margaret?
Thank you, Jeff. One of the most important things we discussed already in the call is your accounts receivable. What do you do to actually collect the money that's due to your center? Do you have a protocol in place? What do you use to collect the money? Do you have a process? Do you share that process with everyone in your center? Do you look at each case on an individual basis? Do you verify the insurance? Do you verify that you are going to get paid for the case prior to doing it? Do you know what the co-insurance is? Do you know what the patient owes? What is the patient's deductible on every single case? What do you do to collect your money up front? Do you collect it on the day of service, or do you bill the patient later? How does your staff follow up with each payer? And again, I go back to the documentation. You need to make sure that your staff knows what they're doing when they call the payer to collect, and what are they telling you? Is that information available to you? Do you know exactly what they've said to the payer? And lastly, I'll go into these more in detail, but do you audit? What is it that your staff is doing? Do you know exactly that they're following their AR protocol? Can you prove that they are? One of the keys to success in your collections is that once you develop an AR protocol, you actually educate everyone. It starts with your administrator. Make sure that the administrator understands the protocol and knows how to use it. Then that education needs to go to the staff. Do they know? Do they have the AR protocol printed? Is it easy for them to look up and to know what to do? Are the processes clear? What do you use for transcription? Are you getting your transcription back in a timely manner? If you're not, then you can't really bill in a timely manner. Coding. Once your transcription is done, does it go to the coding company immediately? Do you use the same transcription company as the coding company? If so, then it should be done in hours. If not, then perhaps that's an area you could look at to improve your profitability. You can never overtrain your staff. They're your most valuable asset when it comes to collecting. So make sure that you are constantly keeping them up on coding, who to use, who to go to, what to do to get the collections in the door. Also, there are so many options out there for outsourcing. If you're doing any of your collections, coding, transcription, anything in-house, you may want to look at outsourcing. If your AR days are high, that could be an option for you to get those into that 30 to 33% or 33-day range. You need to have tools in place to analyze the quality of what your staff is doing. As I said before, you need to go in and audit, look at what they're doing, have them document who they're talking to when they call a payer. How often are they touching the account? Jason touched on this before, but you need to make sure that the staff is following up with the payers in a timely manner. When do they make the first phone call? What do they do when you receive a denial? What does your appeals process actually look like? Jeff, questions?
Thank you, Margaret. One of the things that we're happy to share, if you do not have an AR protocol, we are happy to share our sample AR protocol that we use and has been very successful for us over the years. So if you don't have an AR protocol or want to compare your AR protocol to ours, please just send me an email, jpeo@scoa.com, and I'll make sure you get a copy of what our AR protocol is. So if there's anybody out there that's not sure, we'd be happy to share that with you. Now we'll turn the time back over to Scott. I think he's going to take some of the questions that have been asked or additional questions and turn some time over to Scott.
Great, Jeff. What I'll do is direct the questions to you, and you'll let me know, or the audience, whether Jason or Margaret will take them with you. But we've got about a dozen good questions. Let me start there. Jeff, why don't we start with some just quick tips on recruiting and retention of physicians, and then we'll look at some of the other questions here too.
Sure. Quick tips on recruiting and retention. The retention aspect of it, well, actually the recruiting aspect of it as a whole, is the number one tip is communication. The doctors need to understand exactly what you can provide for them and what you can't. They need to be communicated to through the whole process. They need to understand. I've seen more doctors lost in the recruiting process because they feel like it's fallen by the wayside, that nobody has spoken with them or communicated with them, or they have false assumptions of what can happen for them at the surgery center. It saves a lot of headache and heartache by communicating, and I'd say almost over-communicating with those doctors. But as I said before, this is a roll up your sleeves, get it done type of a job. There's no magic powder you can sprinkle on this thing. It is work. It's almost a full-time job. I mean, it is a full-time job for me and for my team. But it's very difficult for an administrator of a surgery center to do this on their own. You have to involve your doctor group, you have to involve your staff, and you always have to be recruiting. Otherwise, it will fall by the wayside and will be just something you get to next month, and that will mean your center will not continue to grow.
Jeff, a tie to recruitment, a related question: hospital-employed physicians. Are you able to recruit hospital-employed physicians? Is it
Great
deal
question,
by deal?
Scott. Yeah, it's a deal-by-deal scenario right now. It really depends on what the hospital's perspective is on that. If the hospital is not a partner in that individual project, the likelihood is that they will not allow the doctors to join that surgery center project. We do have a number of surgery center joint ventures with a hospital as a partner where they have allowed or chosen to allow their doctors to invest. We do have just a couple, just a handful, small handful of centers where a hospital has said, we are willing to allow this physician, even though they are a employed physician, to do their outpatient appropriate cases in a surgery center, and they can be an owner there. Their idea behind that really is the fact that they'd like to replace those cases, those outpatient cases, with higher paying inpatient cases. It's very few hospitals that are mature enough or sophisticated enough to recognize that is possible. But it is a case-by-case basis, really.
In some hospitals, tough on it. Some allow it, but you guys have been successful with some places that allow it. There's a couple questions on case costing. One of them you sort of had Jason go over again, but there's two other related questions. How are staffing costs taken into account in the case costing equation? And then how are indirect costs, like real estate and other costs, taken into account? And then maybe Jason could, if it's possible, could quickly walk through his case costing model again, or just the highlights of it and so forth. But the two questions: are real estate costs taken into account, and those types of indirect costs, as well as staffing costs? How are those taken into account?
Sure. For case costing, to answer the first, staffing cost is calculated in the total operating expense. It's the one that's calculated into the fixed cost per minute.
Jason would be. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. You got it.
Oh, that's fine. The real estate is not a factor into the case costing itself. Any capital loans or anything that falls out on the balance sheet, we do not incorporate into our case costing for profitability per case.
And how significant, like a typical real estate situation for you, how significant are those costs, and why don't you take them into account in the case costing?
Scott, I can probably take that one. For us, typically the rent costs are between 17, or actually significantly less than that, about 10% of the revenue that we generate there. So, for us, you could get much more complicated in the case costing. You could put in, all sorts of things. It becomes too cumbersome and really ineffective when you're trying to factor in too many things. This is a simplistic, it is by no means an accurate, completely accurate, case costing, but it's been great for us and a simple thing that keeps it so that it can be done in a short period of time. But really,
and because you have the fixed real estate cost anyways, Jeff, I take it in terms of understanding your contribution margin per case, that's already
absolutely. Yes, Scott. It's baked in essence already, basically, because it's a fixed cost for us from a rent perspective.
Okay. If somebody had asked that question, somebody else was going to chime in?
Well, I was just going to say, Scott, one of the most important things is to look at the cost that we can actually control. So I saw that one of the questions was staffing, and we look at that on a per-case basis. That is factored into the overhead cost and supplies and, staffing, the two things that we actually can control in case costing.
And the idea being that the ongoing real estate costs you're sort of stuck with at least for the next 5-10 years, whereas the staffing costs and some of the supply costs you could touch on all the time. Any tips on collecting deductibles prior to procedures or generally collecting from patients?
We generally try to let every patient know ahead of time what they're going to owe. Number one, a common courtesy, but actually that's one of the ways that you can control what you're going to get. Also, we try not to give them options on payment, but sometimes there's no way around it. Advice to collect at least 50% of what the patient will owe you up front. Try to collect the balance within 30 days or at most 90.
And then tips on are letting the patients know up front and working with them closely up front to try and get paid early rather than late, I take it.
Phone calls. As soon as you verify the insurance and you know what you're going to get paid, you can, judge what you need to collect from the patient. You know what the deductible is. You know what the copay is.
Let me ask a couple other questions that relate to payer reimbursement and payer rates. Jeff, and you'll let me know the right person on these, is contracts include reimbursement for implants with revenue code 278, and this may be too specific for this call, but the concept being that they're getting takebacks from the payer and the payers aren't paying for some of these things. That's sort of one issue, and then there's a more general issue. So that would be on implants, payers not paying for them or trying to recoup money on implants, and what experience has been on those kinds of things. And the next thing is just any tips on negotiating generally with payers to get better contracts.
Yeah, I think that specific question, I saw that one come up, Scott, I think we'll try and address specifically with them and understand exactly what their issue is. We'll follow up with them by email specifically. But Margaret, do you want to speak a little bit about Scott's second question?
I think you must know your contract and make sure that you are looking at the contract when you accept the case. Know what your payer will allow for implants. And I don't believe that we've ever been in a situation that we would think that a kickback would occur on an implant. Am I answering your question?
Well, and I think part of it was questions on sort of implants and then having the money taken back by the payer, saying they would pay but then not paying or trying to get the money back. Not so much kickbacks, not so much that issue, but then the other issue was, and what, just tips on doing better with payer negotiation. And before we get to that question, I know we're at 2 o'clock. We still have about 140 to 150 people on the phone, so I'd love to keep going, and people obviously feel free to drop off as you have to drop off. We've got about 5 to 10 more questions for Jeff, Margaret, and Jason, so I just assume at least for all those that want to stay on, please do stay on. So any just tips on managed care negotiation, and then Jeff, I'm going to come back to you with several other questions.
Hey, one thing I'll say just on the managed care negotiations, the thing that I have noticed, and this is going in and looking at struggling centers, and we'll have Margaret or Jason chime in after this as well, but too often places take the first contract that's offered to them and feel like, well, we're never going to do any better. Here you go. We're just going to sign this. And they're locked into these contracts that are just terrible, terrible contracts. So make sure that if you don't feel you're sophisticated enough in the ways of contract negotiation, get help. There's a lot of, third parties that will come in and do your contract negotiation for you that do this all the time and every day. And it may be very well worth the money to have one of those companies, and there's a number of them out there, but it may be very well worth it for you to spend those dollars to have them negotiate your contracts for you and to give you advice because they've seen other contracts in that marketplace. So,
I agree. That's huge. The most important thing you can do is make sure you have a good contract.
And I'll add to that with the implant part. Too many times we see in the struggling centers, they just simply do not have the data to provide to the payer when negotiating their contract. I strongly, we see that a lot of times the centers, well, this payer is not going to pay for the implant, so we just don't bill it. My recommendation would be bill it right off your charges, but that at the end of the year you'll have the data knowing how much implant that you did not get reimbursed for, and use that data when you're negotiating with the payer.
Let me follow up with a couple of additional questions. Jeff, we've got questions from all kinds of different issues. Let me give a couple of benchmark for AR days. I know that partly that was answered, but maybe a quick benchmark again on AR days. And then I'd love to move to the out-of-network versus in-network question and some of the other benchmark issues on upfront collections. What do you typically benchmark for AR days?
It really depends on what your payer mix is, for one. If you have a lot of commercial, you'll be closer to the 30 to 33 days, ideally. If you have a lot of Medicare, that number will be less. Sometimes what you'll find is that number drops significantly lower, and that can be a red flag that says the person that you have that's doing the collecting is trying once and then writing that off and, shoving them in a desk somewhere and ignoring them and calling it good, calling it, as uncollectible. And that can be a red flag for you as well. So if it's too low or if it's too high, you want to look into that and find out what's keeping, what's pushing it too low or what's pushing it too high, and go from there. So
and sometimes a high. Gotcha. Okay. Good. That's a good benchmark number. And sometimes if it gets too low, it means people are writing off stuff too quickly. Sometimes it can be high because you're dealing with out-of-network, but you really have to judge the number against your facts and your payer contracts and what you're doing with your mix of patients. And as you guys have moved over the years from more out-of-network to in-network, can you explain a little bit about how that's gone and any tips and thoughts on why you've done it and what's happened with it?
Yeah, I mean, especially as you're getting a center that's up and going, you're going to be out of network because you just don't have good contracts yet. You're not going to, if you're following the advice we gave a few minutes ago, you're not going to sign the first thing that came across your desk. You're just not going to be able to make up for you signing a bad contract in the long haul. So what you do initially is you sacrifice the number of patients that you're able to bring to the center by getting the higher reimbursement. And so if you chart that, your overall revenue number that you receive from having the fewer patients multiplied by the greater reimbursement, and you look at that line on a graph, there's another line that goes number of patients that you get by being in network at a smaller amount, and those two lines will cross at some point. And when the total revenue goes higher by being in network as opposed to being out of network, then you sign those contracts for in network and you get over into, you have more patients and you're able to generate more revenue to the center. So it's a numbers game, and you look at that and you see, where you are on the graph. It's kind of just a revenue number.
It's additional cases versus lower reimbursement and trying to hit the right balance where the crossover is to get more cases without losing too much reimbursement.
Exactly, and that's by payer as well, because you're not the number of centers that are out there that are 100% out of network have dwindled significantly. I mean, there's still some places where that happens in New Jersey and some other places, but it really should be on a payer by payer basis. As those payers have more or less, taste for out of network, or there may be payers that just don't even have an out of network at all. So you wouldn't be out of network with them.
Let me ask a question that I'll take a piece of somebody's question here, Jeff. Is how do you prepare physicians for new equipment request, or how do you say no or yes, or judge new equipment request? And then after that question, I'd love to move to the question on staff morale. What kinds of things do you do to keep staff morale up? But on the question of equipment, I know if somebody wants a new piece of equipment, or you think the center needs a piece of equipment, how do you judge that and decide to spend the money, not spend the money, et cetera?
That's a great question. There are pieces of equipment that just have to be purchased. If you need a new anesthesia machine because your other one's broken, or those sorts of things, obviously you do whatever you can to get those pieces of equipment in. I think typically, and what this person may be asking is, you get physicians that go to their academy meetings and come back and say, oh my gosh, you should see this new piece of equipment. We just have to have it for the center. And what we do is we help that physician that has come back, very excited about a new piece of equipment, and we help them make a business case for it. We help them say, okay, this is how much the equipment's going to be. And this is how much, if you're going to finance it, it'll be this much. If you're going to pay for it out of distributions, it would take this many months of nobody getting distributions to be able to pay for this machine. The other thing that we add into that is we say, what new cases can be done because of having this machine or this piece of equipment that weren't able to be done before? And what does that reflect from a revenue perspective for the surgery center? And we give that and arm the doctor that's interested in this new equipment. We arm them with that information, and we present it at a board meeting. And we have a discussion about it to say, does this make sense for us to add this, or does it not? And I have not seen, granted, I haven't been to as many board meetings as Margaret or Jason, and they can comment on this in just a second, but I haven't seen a piece of equipment get denied that truly added service to us, added different cases that we could do and that made financial sense. Our partners all are interested in expanding our service lines, but I have seen lots of pieces of equipment that were just, just eye candy, that weren't anything, didn't deliver something new that they couldn't do with the equipment they already have. Jason or Margaret, have you seen anything there? Sorry, go ahead, Scott.
Well, let me ask you a follow-up, slightly different question, but one that maybe you or all three of you can answer quickly. And this goes to the heart of the webinar. Tips to be more efficient, to be as efficient or profitable as possible. Any one suggestion that either you have or each one of you has, like the single most important suggestion you have?
I'll go first because they're smarter than I am, and I don't want to have them take my answer. My answer is this: to be the most efficient, only be open and only staff for as many days as you need to when you're vertically scheduled. So if you can only have the cases, to be open for 3 days, and in your OR, stay open for 3 days. Don't be open for 5. Don't staff for 5. Compress that schedule as much as possible. It cuts down on your staffing costs. It cuts down on so many different expenses with the surgery center. Compress the schedule.
I agree.
I'll add to that, Scott. I'll just say educate your doctors. Educate your doctors on what things cost to run this facility. Educate them on supply costs, what you're paying for staff. Doctors are data junkies just like we are. The more data that you can provide them, the more efficient you can make your center.
And to that end, how responsive do you find your physicians to be generally? Are they very responsive to those discussions, or any tips on getting them to be responsive, or how do you find them on these issues?
Typically, they're very responsive.
Yeah, very receptive to any information you can give them. Also, they're very competitive.
No question. Margaret, let me ask you a follow-up question, or Jason or Jeff, whoever wants to take a stab at this. The backbone of a center is both the physicians and then its staff. If the staff doesn't run things great, very hard for the physicians to do surgery, very hard for the whole thing to work well if you don't have a great staff. How do you go about keeping morale up? Any suggestions on keeping staff morale up?
For me, I find the most important thing I can do is make every physician and every staff member feel special. Make them feel important. It's not always about the money. It's not about what you can pay. It's not about how much time you can give them off. It's about making them feel important and special, that they are a part of a team and they're meaningful to that team.
Right. And what about with the same thing, not just on the physician side, but with your staff, with your nurses, with your business office, especially when really busy, and they're not getting distributions, or hopefully getting paid well and being treated fairly economically. But how do you keep morale up with those people?
I think one of the keys, and this is key for the doctors as well, and key for the center as a whole, is creating a culture of communication, so that everybody understands exactly what's going on, that you're rewarding and recognizing the efforts, and oftentimes Herculean efforts that are done by staff that go unnoticed typically. Recognize those people. Make sure your doctors understand that they're doing that. And make sure that your doctors, spread a good word for those people and say, hey, thank you. I mean, that can go a long way. But also, bonuses or at holiday times or other things of that nature, really go a long way as well. People will really bend over backwards for their doctor group.
A different question: cancellations, surgery cancellations. Do you track those? How closely do you track them? Is there a target amount for them? How big a problem is this in centers typically, cancellations?
We do track and trend our cancellations from the time that the case actually comes across and is scheduled. We would prefer to see less than 0.25, less than 0.25% in cancellation. The key is education, educating the physician, their office staff, and what is an appropriate case for the surgery center. Anesthesia guidelines are huge. I mean, cancellations lead to inefficiency in many, many ways. Overtime of your staff, burnout of your physicians, of your staff. It's key to maintain those relationships and constantly educate everyone, not just your staff, but your physicians and your physician office staff.
Yes, like a high level of education on how costly cancellations are. You do keep a target rate and try and manage it as much as you can, but the best thing you do to defend against is to make sure everybody knows, surgeon, staff, everybody, how important it is to keep that low.
Yeah.
Jeff, there's a couple questions that tie into payer contracting, and either you or Margaret or Jason. One question was, with deductibles becoming so high, is out of network becoming such a challenge, and how much does it become the case that really patients become cash customers? How often are you saying that really your patient is really the final payer today versus just a co-pay payer or co-insurance payer?
I'll pass that off to Jason and to Margaret, and they can both give their experience. They cover different areas of the country. So,
Jason, how often are you seeing that really the ultimate payer for the case is that not in a cosmetic surgery where that would be normal, But in a regular surgery, because of high deductibles, the patients really become the real customer or the real payer for the service.
Well, it's certainly in the last few years become more of the norm to see much higher deductibles with our patients. As Margaret alluded to earlier, that's where we want to get in front of the patient prior to date of service, go over the entire co-insurance deductible, what's been met, what hasn't been met, and what their expectation to pay will be prior to date of service. Our key motto is we want no surprises the date of service. And the last thing we want is when the patient's checking in and you tell them how much money they're going to owe, and they freak out and want to cancel the case or not. So communication is key. We do strive on trying to collect that money up front, as Margaret alluded to, and we do see it more and more in today's time.
And so I don't think you can put an exact number, but you probably ultimately can, the percentage of patients where you're getting this, where it really becomes the patient paying. But right now, from 1% a few years ago to at least several to 10% now, and seemingly growing as people have more and more high deductible plans. A related question, Jeff, resources you could point to for managed care contracting. I know you guys do a lot of it yourself, and then you outsource some of it. Any thoughts on, somebody's asked for any suggestions on resources for managed care contracting?
Yeah, when we outsource our managed care contracting, we use a third party called Avaya, but there are a number of them that are out there. We use Avaya because they're quite honestly in some markets just really, really good and better at it than we are. And if they're better at it than we are, it's worth the money to spend doing it there. So, find somebody that has an experience level there and in that marketplace and use them. If you're not feeling comfortable with it, definitely use an outside vendor.
Great. Let me ask one more question. We've touched on most of these questions in one way or another because we've got several different people that ask variations of questions. Jason, I think this goes back to something that you and Jeff have talked about and Margaret's talked about, but a center is struggling with supply cost. Some tips on how to be more efficient with supply cost.
Sure. So, if you're struggling with your supply costs and your supply costs are out of whack, first thing I would start with is educating the doctors on what those supplies cost. Look at your inventory. Look at your contract compliance with that supply. If you're not using a GPO, find one. It doesn't cost you anything to use a GPO. Access their contracts, and then make sure you're compliant on those contracts. Inventory is a very deep area. If you don't have a full-time dedicated materials manager that really gets it, you might want to look for one because it's a very detailed area. And look for those LOCs, look for those tier levels that you can get better pricing. Just like I said on that one example, to lower a cost of one drug from $73 to $6, I would start with my top 20 supplies and make sure I'm getting contract LOCs signed on those items.
And so you'd really focus on you wouldn't focus on every single supply, but you'd start with your top 10, top 20, top 30 to make sure you're focusing on where there might be material savings. And you'd also start with making sure you got GPO contracts in place. What else did you have to say there, Jason, just to see if I missed any core concept you set forth?
Right. I would start on my top 10 items that are ordered, not necessarily by cost, but by quantity. That'll be your biggest bang for your buck, but that will probably lead you into looking at other areas as far as supply costs go.
Great. Let me ask a follow-up question on the cancellations question. Typically, your centers, Jeff, might be seeing anywhere from 50 to, 100 to 500 cases a month or more, just on average in a week. Is it a couple cancellations a week that you see? Is it 10 cancellations a week? I know Margaret, you would set forth. Yeah. Is it one out of every 100 patients? What's the cancellation rate that you see? Just about, very ballparkish.
I saw the question come through from Roger, and I certainly understand. The rate of cancellation is going to depend on the type of surgery, which I see you brought that up, and also what are we actually defining as cancellation? A day of surgery cancellation after the patient is in pre-op? Or are we talking about a case that's scheduled and it's canceled a week out for many different reasons? So I'm happy to drill down on that.
Let me drill down on it. I think what people are most concerned about is not the one that's canceled a week or 2 weeks out, the one that's canceled not when it's not cleared medically in the center either, the one that's canceled the day of, a day before, or 2 days before, that the center can't adjust for and then loses money because of. You know, obviously the one that. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
In our surgery centers, it's less than 1%. Much less.
You got it. So like a week out, you might see some cancellations. Day of, it's going to be unusual. It's going to be day of, meaning the person's already in pre-op and already going. It's going to be unusual and still going to be a medical reason or something else that's happened where the anesthesiologist won't clear them or see some reason why they can't do it. But it's the ones that are, and those are somewhat not controllable or not too controllable, but it's those ones that get canceled the day before, the morning of, that you've prepped for, you've put money out for, and it will cost you, and those are less than 1%.
Correct.
Okay. Hopefully that's helpful to clarifying that. Jeff, I think we've really worked through all the different questions that we have, and so I guess at this point, want to thank your team tremendously, just tremendous information. Would love to have the three of you do a similar session at one of our meetings, and I know you always do different variations of sessions like this. Would love to have this because this is very, very helpful. I know that we went for more than an hour and 20 minutes or so, and we still have almost 80, 90 people on the phone, so people found your talk useful. If people have follow-up, I know that Jeff and his company are in the business of trying to develop and buy centers and grow centers. Please do email Jeff at jpayo@ascoa.com. You're also free to email Margaret or Jason with questions, but probably as good as anything to turn them to Jeff and he'll get them to the right person. But again, Jeff Payo, Jeff and Margaret and Jason, thank you guys very, very much. Just a pleasure having you guys present.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.